Wyoming Territory, 1878. A land where the sky stretched endlessly blue above rolling prairies and jagged mountains, where a person's words still carried more weight than written law, and where the divide between survival and failure could be as thin as a whisper of luck. For city folk venturing west, the untamed landscape presented challenges beyond imagination, particularly for those whose experience with horses extended no further than the occasional carriage ride down cobblestone streets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of Charlotte Bennett, a Boston schoolteacher, whose carefully ordered world collapsed when her father's investments failed, leaving her with nothing but debts and desperate choices. With teaching positions scarce and creditors circling, Charlotte reluctantly accepted her cousin's invitation to Wyoming, where the newly established Clearwater Academy needed an educated woman to instruct the children of ranchers and merchants alike. What Charlotte never anticipated was how a chance encounter with Ethan Blackwood, a man as untamed as the stallion that terrified her, would reveal that sometimes the gentlest souls hide behind the roughest exteriors, and that learning to trust can be the bravest act of all. Charlotte clutched her valise with white-knuckled fingers as the stagecoach lurched violently over yet another rut in the excuse for a road. 15 hours of this punishment had left her body aching and her spirits at their lowest ebb. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple returning from visiting their daughter in Denver, had long since fallen into exhausted silence, their initial attempts at polite conversation abandoned as the journey dragged on. When the driver finally called, "Clearwater ahead," Charlotte peered through the dust-streaked window. Her first glimpse of her new home did nothing to lift her spirits. Unlike the picturesque western towns depicted in illustrated magazines, back east, Clearwater appeared to be little more than a haphazard collection of wooden buildings strung along a single wide street. No charming church steeples, no manicured town square, just utilitarian structures built for function rather than beauty. "First time in Wyoming, miss?" The elderly woman across from her had noticed Charlotte's expression. "Is it that obvious?" Charlotte attempted a smile. "We all looked that way once." The woman patted her hand sympathetically. "The territory grows on you, though. There's a beauty to it once you learn to see it." Beauty was the furthest thing from Charlotte's mind as the stagecoach rolled to a stop before the Clearwater Hotel, a grandiose name for what appeared to be a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint. A small crowd had gathered as the twice-weekly stagecoach represented Clearwater's main connection to the outside world. Charlotte Bennett. A woman about 10 years Charlotte's senior pushed through the onlookers, her round face flushed with excitement. "It's me, Margaret." "Oh, thank goodness you've arrived safely." Charlotte barely had time to set foot on Wyoming soil before being enveloped in her cousin's enthusiastic embrace. Margaret Wilson had left Boston 5 years earlier to marry a shopkeeper who'd struck modest success in the Western Territories. Her letters, filled with cheerful descriptions of frontier life, had always seemed like dispatches from another world to Charlotte, until desperation had turned them into a lifeline. "You're absolutely exhausted, you poor thing," Margaret chattered as she instructed a gangly young man to collect Charlotte's trunk. "We'll get you settled at the boarding house, and you can rest before meeting everyone. The school trustees are quite eager to make your acquaintance, but that can wait until tomorrow." Charlotte allowed herself to be guided down Clearwater's main street, too weary to do more than nod at Margaret's running commentary on the town and its inhabitants. The boarding house, run by a widow named Mrs. Holloway, proved to be unexpectedly clean and comfortable, if sparsely furnished. After Margaret finally departed with promises to return in the morning, Charlotte sank onto the narrow bed and allowed tears to flow for the first time since leaving Boston. She had never wanted this. Teaching had been her passion, not her necessity, in the genteel girls' school where she'd built a reputation for academic excellence. At 26, she had been content with her independence, her small but elegant apartment, her circle of literary friends. Then had come her father's death, followed by the devastating revelation of his financial ruin. The family name that had once opened doors now carried the stain of debts that could never be repaid. Friends had quietly distanced themselves, teaching. Positions mysteriously filled before she could apply. When Margaret's letter arrived, describing Clearwater's need for a qualified teacher and offering to help Charlotte establish herself, pride had wrestled with necessity. Necessity won. Now as she unpacked her few remaining possessions, the book she couldn't bear to sell, the daguerreotype of her parents in happier times, her mother's silver hairbrush, Charlotte wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Morning brought no relief from her misgivings. Though Margaret arrived with fresh-baked scones and contagious enthusiasm, Charlotte's first proper look at Clearwater in daylight only confirmed her initial impressions. The town was raw, dusty, and utterly foreign to everything she had known. Children played in the streets without supervision. Women hung laundry on lines strung between buildings, and men moved with a loose-limbed confidence that spoke of lives spent in physical labor rather than intellectual pursuit. "The schoolhouse is just down this way," Margaret explained, guiding Charlotte past the general store, proudly displaying Wilson's Mercantile on its sign, the sheriff's office, and what appeared to be a combination barber shop and dentist's office. "It's not what you're used to, of course, but the town raised the money for proper desks last year, and there's a decent collection of books." Charlotte tried to summon enthusiasm as the small clapboard building came into view. A crude sign proclaimed it Clearwater Academy, a name that seemed absurdly pretentious for the simple structure. Inside, the single room contained neat rows of desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. Sunlight streamed through windows that comprised most of the eastern wall, a practical consideration in a place where lamp oil was expensive. The children ranged from 6 to 15, Margaret explained. About 20 in all, though attendance gets spotty during planting and harvest. The ranchers' children sometimes can't make it in during bad weather, but they try. These families value education, Charlotte. That's why they were so excited when I told them about you. Charlotte ran her fingers along one of the desks, noting the smooth wear of the wood. "And the curriculum? That's largely up to you. Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course. History, geography as you see fit. The previous teacher, Mr. Peterson, left some materials, but he was called back east to care for his ailing mother 3 months ago. The children have had only sporadic instruction since." "I see." Charlotte moved to the teacher's desk, already mentally organizing lessons and schedules. Whatever her reservations about Clearwater, these children deserved her best efforts. Teaching had always been her refuge. Perhaps it could be so again. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of introductions. The school trustees, consisting of the town mayor, who also owned the hotel, the local doctor, Margaret's husband Thomas, and 2 prosperous ranchers, regarded Charlotte with a mixture of respect for her Boston education and skepticism about her suitability for frontier life. She recognized the doubt in their eyes, the same doubt she harbored herself. "You come highly recommended, Miss Bennett," Mayor Griffith said after the formal introductions. "But I feel I should be direct. Teaching here isn't like teaching in your eastern schools. Our children need practical knowledge alongside book learning, and the conditions can be challenging." "I understand, Mayor." Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "I may be new to Wyoming, but I'm not unfamiliar with hard work or adaptation. Judge me by my results, if you would." This seemed to satisfy him, and the meeting concluded with arrangements for Charlotte to begin teaching the following Monday, giving her 3 days to settle in and prepare. As the trustees filed out, one of the ranchers, a weathered man named James Harrison, lingered. "Miss Bennett, I wanted to extend an invitation. My wife suggested you might enjoy seeing a bit of the country before you're confined to the schoolhouse. We're hosting a small gathering at our ranch tomorrow. Nothing fancy. Just neighbors coming together for a meal and some music. It would give you a chance to meet some of the parents and children in a less formal setting. Charlotte's instinct was to decline. The thought of more socializing with strangers was exhausting. But Margaret, overhearing, immediately accepted on her behalf. What a wonderful idea. Charlotte would be delighted, wouldn't you, dear? The Harrison Ranch is one of the finest in the territory, and Sarah Harrison is an absolute treasure. And so it was arranged. Charlotte would accompany Margaret and Thomas to the gathering the following afternoon, a prospect that filled her with dread. She had never been comfortable in social situations, preferring the company of books to the unpredictability of people. In Boston, she had cultivated a small circle of like-minded friends, fellow teachers, and literary enthusiasts who gathered for poetry readings and discussions of philosophy. The idea of making small talk with ranchers and their families stretched her limited social skills to the breaking point. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Harrison Ranch lay about 5 miles outside of Clearwater, and the journey there provided Charlotte's first real glimpse of the Wyoming landscape beyond the town's dusty confines. Despite herself, she found her breath catching at the sight of the rolling prairie stretching toward distant mountains, the late summer grasses rippling like a golden sea under the endless blue sky. "It's something, isn't it?" Thomas Wilson remarked, noting her expression from his position at the wagon's reins. "Not like our crowded eastern states. Out here, a person can breathe." Charlotte had to admit there was a wild beauty to it, though. The vastness triggered an unexpected sense of vulnerability. In Boston, one was never truly alone. Buildings and people hemmed you in with a constant reassuring presence. Here, the land swallowed human presence, making even substantial structures, like the Harrison Ranch house, seem temporary against the eternal landscape. The gathering proved larger than Charlotte had anticipated. At least 30 people had assembled, families from neighboring ranches, some having traveled considerable distances. Tables laden with food had been set up in the shade of cottonwood trees, and children darted about in a game of tag, while adults conversed in small groups. Margaret immediately set about introducing Charlotte to everyone, a dizzying procession of names and faces that blurred together. The women regarded her with friendly curiosity, asking questions about Boston fashions and expressing sympathy over her father's passing. Charlotte found herself repeating the same carefully edited version of her circumstances, omitting the humiliating details of her father's financial disgrace. "And this is Sarah Harrison, our hostess." Margaret finally presented her to a handsome woman in her 40s with lines around her eyes and streaks of silver in her dark hair. "Miss Bennett, I'm so pleased you could join us." Sarah Harrison took both of Charlotte's hands in hers. "We've been praying for a new teacher since Mr. Peterson left. These children need stability and guidance." "I hope I can provide that," Charlotte replied, warming to the woman's genuine welcome. "Your home is lovely." "Oh, it's just a simple place, but we've tried to make it comfortable." James believes that civilization requires more than just survival. It needs beauty and grace as well. That's why education is so important to us. She gestured toward a piano visible through the open door of the ranch house. "Do you play? We so rarely have music out here." Charlotte admitted that she did, which immediately led to requests for a performance. Despite her protests, she soon found herself seated at the instrument, a surprisingly fine Steinway that must have cost a fortune to transport to Wyoming. The familiar feel of the keys beneath her fingers provided unexpected comfort, and she lost herself in a Chopin nocturne, momentarily forgetting her audience. When she finished, the applause was enthusiastic, and Charlotte felt the first genuine smile of her Wyoming experience forming. Perhaps there was a place for her here after all, even if it wasn't the place she had imagined for herself. The afternoon progressed pleasantly as Charlotte began matching names to the children who would soon be her pupils. She was particularly drawn to 10-year-old Emma Harrison, Sarah's daughter, who shyly confessed a love of reading that matched Charlotte's own. "Papa brings me books whenever he goes to Cheyenne," Emma confided. "I've read Little Women 3 times. Then we shall have to find you new challenges," Charlotte promised, already planning to share some of her own precious volumes with the girl. As the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Charlotte found herself momentarily alone. Margaret was deep in conversation with several women about preserving techniques, and Thomas had joined the men discussing cattle prices. Seeking a moment's respite from socializing, Charlotte wandered toward a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. She had always admired horses from a distance. Their grace and power made them wonderful subjects for art and poetry, but her actual experience with the animals was limited to the docile carriage horses that plodded through Boston streets. These western horses seemed different somehow, rangier, more alert, with a wildness in their eyes that both fascinated and unnerved her. As she watched, a magnificent black stallion trotted into the corral from an adjoining paddock. Unlike the other horses, this animal moved with spectacular presence, its muscled body gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Charlotte caught her breath at its beauty, then gasped again when it suddenly reared, powerful forelegs pawing at the air before coming down with a force that sent dust billowing. Instinctively, Charlotte stumbled backward, colliding with something solid and warm. Strong hands steadied her shoulders as a deep voice asked, "You all right, ma'am?" She turned to find herself looking up at a man she hadn't yet met, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of the Wyoming sky. Unlike the other men at the gathering, who had made concessions to the social occasion with clean shirts and carefully combed hair, this man wore dusty riding clothes and a stubbled jaw that suggested he'd come straight from work. A Stetson hat cast shadows across features that might have been handsome if not for their stern set. "I'm fine, thank you," Charlotte said, stepping away from his steadying grip. "The horse startled me. I didn't realize anyone was behind me. Didn't mean to frighten you. Saw you backing up and thought you might fall." His voice had a gravelly quality, as though he didn't use it often. "You must be the new school teacher. Miss Bennett, right?" "Yes, Charlotte Bennett." She extended her hand automatically, then wondered if the gesture was too formal for the setting. But the man took it briefly in a calloused palm. "Ethan Blackwood. I manage the northern section of Harrison's range." His eyes returned to the black stallion, which was now trotting along the fence line with arched neck and tail held high. "That's Tempest. Best cutting horse in 3 territories once he's properly trained. He seems dangerous." Charlotte couldn't keep the unease from her voice. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Ethan's eyes. "He's spirited, not dangerous. There's a difference." "Perhaps to those who understand horses," Charlotte conceded. "I'm afraid my knowledge is limited to literary descriptions and carriage rides. City folk usually think spirit means danger." It wasn't said unkindly, but as a simple observation. "Tempest there. He's testing boundaries, seeing what he can get away with, but there's no meanness in him." As if to contradict this assessment, the stallion chose that moment to charge toward them, stopping abruptly at the fence with a challenging snort that sent Charlotte stumbling backward again. This time, she managed to catch herself without Ethan's assistance, though her heart hammered wildly. "He seems rather determined to prove you wrong, Mr. Blackwood." Ethan made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "He's showing off is all. Wanting to make sure you know he's something special." He stepped to the fence, murmuring something to the horse that Charlotte couldn't catch. Remarkably, the stallion's aggressive stance softened, his ears flicking forward as he extended his muzzle toward Ethan's outstretched hand. He's gentle, like I planned to be, Ethan said, still focused on the horse. For all his fire, he just needs someone who understands him, someone patient enough to earn his trust. He glanced at Charlotte with those piercing blue eyes. Would you like to touch him? Oh no, I couldn't possibly, Charlotte began, but Ethan had already extended his hand toward her. Come on, he won't hurt you. Sometimes the only way past fear is straight through it. Something in his quiet confidence made Charlotte step forward, despite her misgivings. Ethan positioned her slightly to his side, then guided her hand toward the stallion's nose. Let him smell you first. That's how horses get to know folks. Charlotte held her breath as the stallion's velvet muzzle snuffled at her palm. The sensation was ticklish and strangely intimate. After a moment, Ethan moved her hand to the horse's forehead, showing her how to stroke the sleek coat with gentle pressure. See? He's accepting you, Ethan said, his voice softer than before. Horses are better judges of character than most people. They can sense fear, yes, but they can also sense honesty. You don't pretend with a horse. They know what's real. For a brief, suspended moment, Charlotte felt something shift within her, a tension releasing as the magnificent animal accepted her touch without aggression. Then Tempest tossed his head and stepped back, apparently having satisfied his curiosity about the newcomer. Thank you, Charlotte said, surprised by how meaningful the small interaction had felt. I've never been that close to such a powerful animal before. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. Sometimes the things that scare us most turn out to be the things we needed to face. His gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than was comfortable before he touched the brim of his hat. Excuse me, Miss Bennett. I need to check on the other horses before dark. Charlotte watched him stride away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. There was something compelling about his quiet intensity, so different from the polished manners of Boston gentlemen. She had the distinct impression that Ethan Blackwood was a man who said exactly what he meant, no more, no less, a rarity in her experience. I see you've met our mysterious Mr. Blackwood, Sarah Harrison's voice startled Charlotte from her thoughts. Mysterious? Charlotte echoed, turning to find her hostess watching her with a knowing smile. Ethan's been with us for 3 years, and he's still something of an enigma, Sarah explained. James says he's the best ranch manager he's ever employed, knows cattle and horses like he was born to them. But he keeps to himself, rarely comes to town, never joins in social gatherings. She nodded toward the corral. That's the most I've seen him talk to anyone in months. You must have made an impression. I doubt that, Charlotte said, feeling oddly flustered. We were just discussing the horse. Tempest, he called it. Ah, that explains it. Ethan raised that stallion. From a colt, saved it when the mare died foaling. If there's one thing that will get him talking, it's his horses. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. There's a story there, I'm sure, but Ethan doesn't share his past. James hired him based on a recommendation from an old army friend. All we know is that he fought in the war and spent some time with the cavalry afterward. Charlotte found her gaze drawn back to Ethan's retreating figure. He seems different from the other ranchers I've met. He is, Sarah agreed. There's a darkness in him, I think. A weight he carries. But James trusts him completely, and that's good enough for me. She touched Charlotte's arm lightly. Come, they're setting up for dancing, and I promised Margaret I'd introduce you to the Wilson's nephew who's visiting from Denver. A lawyer, I believe, and quite eligible. As Charlotte allowed herself to be led back toward the gathering, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder once more. Ethan had reached a far corral and was leaning against the fence, his attention focused on the horses within. Even at a distance, there was a solitary quality to him that resonated with something in Charlotte's own nature, a sense of being apart from the communal warmth surrounding them. The dancing began as twilight deepened into night, lanterns casting golden pools of light across the packed earth of the ranch yard. Musicians, a fiddler, a guitar player, and a man with a harmonica, struck up lively tunes that soon had couples promenading in patterns, both familiar and strange to Charlotte's eastern eyes. Margaret's promised introduction to the lawyer from Denver resulted in several dances that Charlotte endured rather than enjoyed. Howard Wilson was pleasant enough, but his conversation consisted primarily of detailed accounts of his legal triumphs and thinly veiled boasts about his promising future. After the third such dance, Charlotte begged fatigue and escaped to a bench beneath one of the cottonwoods. From this vantage point, she observed the swirl of humanity before her, families laughing together, young couples exchanging shy glances, children darting between adults despite the late hour. For all its roughness, there was an authenticity to the scene that touched something in Charlotte. These people genuinely enjoyed each other's company, without the artificial social constraints that had governed her Boston existence. Not one for dancing? The now familiar gravelly voice came from the shadows beyond the lantern light. Ethan Blackwood emerged, still in his work clothes, but with his hat removed, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the collar. "I've had my fill for the evening," Charlotte replied, surprisingly unalarmed by his sudden appearance. "And you, Mr. Blackwood? You don't seem to be participating either." Ethan shook his head, leaning against the cottonwood trunk. "Not much for crowds. I came to pay my respects to the Harrisons, not to dance." Charlotte studied him in the dappled light. Without his hat, he appeared younger than she had initially thought, perhaps early 30s, though the lines etched around his eyes suggested experiences beyond his years. "Mr. Harrison speaks highly of you," she offered. "Says you're essential to his operation." A shrug. "I do my job. Nothing more. And what brought you to Wyoming? If you don't mind my asking." Something shuddered in his expression. "Same as brings most men west. A fresh start." Charlotte recognized the boundary and respected it. Her own past held areas she preferred not to discuss. "Well, it seems you found your place, with the horses especially." At the mention of horses, his demeanor softened slightly. "They make sense. No pretense with animals. They are what they are." "Unlike people, you mean?" His mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "City folk especially." "We're not all that complicated," Charlotte protested mildly. "Aren't you?" His gaze was suddenly direct, assessing. Miss Charlotte Bennett, Boston schoolteacher, sitting alone at a social gathering, watching instead of participating. "I'd wager there's more to your story than meets the eye." The accuracy of his observation startled her. "Perhaps the same could be said of you, Mr. Blackwood." This time, the almost smile reached his eyes, transforming his severe features momentarily. "Perhaps." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only when Emma Harrison darted up to Charlotte, breathless with excitement. "Miss Bennett, Mama says you're going to be our teacher." "Will we read poetry? Mr. Peterson never let us read poetry." Charlotte smiled at the girl's enthusiasm. "We'll certainly read poetry, Emma, and many other things." Emma beamed, then noticed Ethan and immediately became shy. "Hello, Mr. Blackwood." "Evening, Miss Emma." Ethan's voice gentled in a way Charlotte hadn't heard before. "Shouldn't you be with your parents?" "Papa sent me to find Miss Bennett. The wagon's leaving soon." Emma tugged at Charlotte's hand. "You will come to dinner again, won't you?" "Before school starts? If your mother invites me, I'd be delighted." Charlotte rose, smoothing her skirts. She turned to Ethan, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Blackwood." He touched his fingers to his forehead in a ghost of a salute. "Likewise, Miss Bennett. Good luck with your teaching." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Don't let Tempest fool you. He's gentler than he appears. Most of us are." With that cryptic remark, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Charlotte to follow Emma toward the waiting wagon. her thoughts unexpectedly occupied by a taciturn cowboy and his spirited stallion. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Charlotte organized the schoolhouse, reviewed the limited materials left by Mr. Peterson, and created lesson plans based on her assessment of what the children might need. By Monday morning, she felt reasonably prepared for her first day, at least academically. Emotionally, she battled waves of doubt. These frontier children were so different from her Boston pupils, their needs and experiences foreign to her. Sheltered upbringing. Standing before the schoolhouse as families began arriving, Charlotte straightened her spine and fixed a confident smile on her face. Margaret had helped her select an outfit that struck a balance between Eastern refinement and Western practicality. A navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist, her hair neatly coiled at the nape of her neck. "Miss Bennet." Emma Harrison was the first to greet her, proudly presenting a shiny red apple. "Mama says teachers always need apples on their first day." "That's very thoughtful, Emma. Thank you." Charlotte accepted the gift, then turned to greet Sarah Harrison, who had driven the wagon bringing Emma and two neighboring children. "I hope they don't overwhelm you," Sarah said with a sympathetic smile. "They're good children, but spirited." "Spirited is good," Charlotte replied, thinking unexpectedly of Ethan's words about Tempest. "It means they're eager to learn." As more children arrived, from the clean, well-dressed offspring of merchants to the rougher-looking ranch children, in homespun clothing, Charlotte felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over her. Whatever her misgivings about Wyoming, these children deserved her best, and teaching was the one area where her confidence remained unshaken. The morning passed more smoothly than she had dared hope. After initial assessments to determine each child's level, Charlotte divided them into groups and set them to tasks appropriate to their abilities. The older students helped the younger ones, a practice she had always encouraged in Boston and found even more essential in this mixed age. Classroom. By midday, Charlotte had identified her challenges: 3 boys at the back who clearly preferred ranch work to schooling, a painfully shy girl who could barely whisper her name, and a general gap in mathematical fundamentals that would require creative approaches to remedy. But she had also discovered unexpected joys: Emma's quick mind and voracious reading appetite, a 10-year-old boy's natural gift for mental arithmetic, and the genuine curiosity that most of the children brought to their learning. As the children ate their lunches in the schoolyard, Charlotte stood in the doorway watching them with a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps she could make a difference here after all. First day going well? The deep voice behind her nearly made Charlotte jump. She turned to find Ethan Blackwood leading his horse down the street, a small wooden crate balanced across his saddle. "Mr. Blackwood, what brings you to town?" She was oddly pleased to see him, though she couldn't have explained why. "Delivering something for Mrs. Harrison." He nodded toward the crate. "Thought I'd see how the schoolhouse was faring with its new teacher." "The children are wonderful," Charlotte said sincerely. "Different from what I'm accustomed to, but eager to learn." Ethan's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Most folks around here didn't have much schooling themselves. They want better for their children, even if it comes in the form of a city teacher who doesn't know one end of a horse from the other." She asked with a small smile, "Especially then. Book learning is what they can't provide themselves." He shifted the crate, which emitted a muffled peeping sound. "Mrs. Harrison's new chicks. Better deliver them before they get too excited." "Of course." Charlotte felt inexplicably disappointed at his departure. "Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Blackwood." He hesitated, then added, "If you're interested in learning more about horses, Miss Bennet, the Harrison Ranch is always open to visitors. Emma would be delighted to show you around." A pause. "So would I." Before Charlotte could respond, he had continued down the street, leaving her to wonder at the unexpected invitation and at her own desire to accept it. The first weeks of school established a rhythm that gradually eased Charlotte's sense of displacement. Mornings found her at the schoolhouse before dawn, preparing lessons by lamplight. Days were filled with the challenges and rewards of teaching minds eager for knowledge. Evenings were spent grading papers, reading, and writing long letters to her few remaining friends in Boston, carefully edited accounts that emphasized the positive aspects of her new life, while omitting the loneliness and doubt that still plagued her quiet moments. Margaret and Thomas welcomed her into their home for Sunday dinners, and Sarah Harrison often invited her to the ranch for weekend visits that Emma eagerly anticipated. During these visits, Charlotte found herself watching for Ethan, though their encounters remained brief and cordial. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained the same distance she had sensed at their first meeting, as though some invisible boundary existed between him and the rest of humanity. "Mr. Blackwood said you wanted to learn about horses," Emma announced. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat on the Harrisons' porch, Charlotte helping the girl with her reading. "He said I should teach you, but I told him he'd be a better teacher since Tempest is his special horse." Charlotte felt a flutter of something she couldn't name. "Did he? When was this?" "Yesterday. He said you were afraid of Tempest, but you shouldn't be because he's gentle inside, like all the best horses." Emma closed her book decisively. "Can we go see him now?" "Mama said it would be fine if we stayed by the house corrals." Unable to refuse the girl's enthusiasm and curious about Ethan's comments, Charlotte agreed. They made their way to the smaller corral where several horses grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. Tempest was among them, his black coat gleaming. "You have to stand still and let him come to you," Emma instructed with the absolute confidence of childhood. "That's what Mr. Blackwood always says. Horses have to decide you're worth knowing." Charlotte obediently stood at the fence rail, feeling somewhat foolish as Emma continued her earnest instruction. To her surprise, Tempest raised his head and regarded them with interest, then trotted over with the same imperial bearing she remembered from their first encounter. "He remembers you," Emma said with delight. "See how his ears are forward? That means he's curious." "I'm flattered," Charlotte replied, still wary of the powerful animal now eyeing her over the rail. "Though I'm not sure what I did to merit his attention." "Sometimes animals just know things about people," came Ethan's voice as he approached from the direction of the barn. "Tempest doesn't bother with most folks. Must sense something special in you, Miss Bennet." Charlotte felt a blush rising to her cheeks and was thankful for the shade of her bonnet. Or perhaps he simply recognizes an easy target for intimidation. Ethan's rare smile made a brief appearance. "Could be. He does enjoy a dramatic entrance." He turned to Emma. "Your mother's looking for you, Miss Emma. Something about helping with pie for supper." Emma sighed dramatically but obediently headed toward the house, leaving Charlotte suddenly alone with Ethan and the intimidating stallion. "You've been avoiding me, Mr. Blackwood," Charlotte said, surprising herself with her directness. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Have I? Every time I visit, you seem to find reasons to be elsewhere." Ethan was silent for a moment, his attention seemingly fixed on Tempest, who had extended his muzzle toward his master's hand. "Not avoiding, just busy." "I see." Charlotte tried to mask her disappointment. "Emma says you offered to teach me about horses. Thought you might want to learn, being in ranch country now. But if you're not interested, I am," she said quickly. "Interested, that is. I should know more about the lives my students lead outside the classroom." Ethan studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Sunday afternoon, then? After church services? I'd like that." Charlotte smiled, then added impulsively, "Though I must warn you, I'm a terrible student when it comes to physical skills. My talents lie entirely with books and ideas. Everyone can learn what they need to." Ethan replied, "It's just a matter of finding the right teacher." He touched his hat brim. "Sunday, then. I'll come by the boarding house at 2. As he walked away, Charlotte realized she was looking forward to Sunday with an eagerness that had nothing to do with horses and everything to do with the enigmatic man who understood them so well. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the landscape in golds and russets. Charlotte attended church services with Margaret and Thomas, half listening to the sermon while her thoughts repeatedly strayed to the afternoon ahead. She had selected her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and sturdy boots that Margaret had insisted she purchase, though they had seemed unnecessary for a schoolteacher. At precisely 2 o'clock, the sound of hooves outside the boarding house brought Charlotte to the window. Ethan sat astride a chestnut gelding, leading a smaller, dun-colored mare. He wore his usual working clothes, though his shirt looked freshly pressed. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennet," he greeted her as she stepped onto the porch. "This is Daisy, gentlest mare on the Harrison spread, perfect for beginners." Charlotte eyed the placid-looking horse with trepidation. "You expect me to ride? Can't learn about horses from the ground," Ethan replied pragmatically. "But we'll take it slow." He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached with the mare's reins. Daisy here raised 3 foals and has seen everything. Nothing spooks her. As if to prove his point, the mare nudged Charlotte's shoulder with velvety lips, nearly causing her to stumble back. "She's just saying hello," Ethan explained, amusement glinting in his eyes. "Horses communicate through touch and body language. They're more like people than most folks realize. They just express themselves differently." For the next hour, Ethan patiently instructed Charlotte in the basics of horsemanship: how to approach a horse, how to read its mood through ear, position and body stance, the proper way to offer a treat, which he had thoughtfully provided in the form of apple slices. Charlotte found herself relaxing as Daisy's gentle demeanor belied her initial fears. "Ready to try mounting up?" Ethan asked finally. "We'll just walk around the edge of town. No galloping, I promise." Charlotte hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." Ethan regarded her steadily. "Fear's natural, Miss Bennet. Helps keep us alive. But sometimes we need to push past it to find what's waiting on the other side." He gestured toward Daisy. "She won't let you fall. And neither will I." Something in his quiet confidence gave Charlotte courage. With his guidance, she placed her foot in the stirrup and awkwardly swung herself into the saddle, gripping the horn with white-knuckled fingers. "Breathe," Ethan reminded her, adjusting her posture with impersonal efficiency. Horses can sense tension. If you're relaxed, they're relaxed. Gradually, Charlotte found her balance, though her heart still raced at the unnerving sensation of being perched atop a living creature. Ethan mounted his own horse and led them at a walking pace along the outskirts of town, keeping up a steady stream of instruction that helped distract her from her anxiety. "Loosen your grip on the reins," he advised. "You're not controlling Daisy, you're communicating with her. Think of it as a conversation, not a command." "I believe I prefer conversations where both parties speak the same language," Charlotte replied, though she obediently relaxed her hands. Ethan's low chuckle surprised her. "You are speaking the same language, just need to learn how to listen differently." He guided them toward an open meadow where late wildflowers still bloomed among the grasses. "Feel how she moves underneath." "You? That's her telling you about the ground, about her mood, about what she's thinking." As they continued their slow circuit, Charlotte gradually relaxed enough to appreciate the experience. The rhythm of Daisy's movement became almost soothing, and the perspective from horseback revealed aspects of the landscape she had never noticed from the ground. When Ethan finally led them back toward town, she felt a mixture of relief and unexpected disappointment that the lesson was ending. "You did well for your first time," Ethan said as he helped her dismount, his strong hands at her waist momentarily before she found solid ground again. "Most city folk scream at least once." Charlotte laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. "I assure you, Mr. Blackwood, I was screaming internally the entire time." "Ethan," he said abruptly, "if we're going to have more lessons, you might as well use my name." "Are we going to have more lessons?" Charlotte asked, her pulse quickening at the prospect. He shrugged, suddenly looking uncomfortable. If you want them, Wyoming's horse country. Might as well learn to ride properly. Then you should call me Charlotte. She smiled up at him, noticing for the first time that his eyes weren't simply blue but contained flecks of gray like the Wyoming sky before a storm. And yes, I would like more lessons, thank you. For a moment, something unguarded passed across his face, a vulnerability that vanished so quickly she might have imagined it. Then he nodded once, touching his hat brim in that habitual gesture. Next Sunday, then. We'll try a slightly longer ride. As Charlotte watched him lead both horses away, she felt strangely buoyant. Wyoming might never be Boston, but perhaps it offered compensation she hadn't anticipated, not least the opportunity to discover strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The promised riding lessons became a Sunday afternoon ritual through the crisp days of October and into November's sharper chill. Ethan proved a patient teacher, never pushing Charlotte beyond her capabilities, but steadily expanding them with each outing. She progressed from nervous clinging to confident posting at a trot, from fearful glances at the ground to appreciative observation of the changing landscape. More significant than her equestrian progress was the gradual thawing of Ethan's reserve. Though he remained a man of few words, those he did speak revealed a thoughtful intelligence that Charlotte found increasingly engaging. He possessed an intimate knowledge of the natural world that no book learning could provide, the patterns of weather and cloud formations, the habits of wildlife, the subtle changes in vegetation that signaled the turning seasons. How did you learn all this? She asked one afternoon as they rested the horses beside a small stream. The day was unseasonably warm, allowing them to sit on sun-warmed rocks while the animals drank. Ethan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. My father was a tracker before the war. Taught me to read sign, to understand what the land was saying. A pause. After he died at Shiloh, I kept learning. Found it easier to make sense of nature than people. It was the most personal information he had ever volunteered, and Charlotte treasured it accordingly. And the horses? Where did that affinity come from? Cavalry, he said shortly, then seemed to reconsider his reticence. Spent 3 years patrolling the territories after the war. You learn to trust your mount when your life depends on it. Learned I had a way with the difficult ones, the horses others couldn't handle. Like Tempest, Charlotte suggested, remembering the magnificent stallion, a shadow of a smile. Tempest is special. Found him as a colt next to his dead dam. Mountain lion got her. Wasn't supposed to survive, but he's stubborn. His eyes met hers briefly. Reminds me of someone else I know. The comparison startled a laugh from her. I'm hardly comparable to that force of nature, Ethan, aren't you? His expression grew serious. Coming out here alone, starting over in a place as foreign to you as the moon, takes a certain spirit, Charlotte. Hearing her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. Necessity, not spirit, she corrected. I had few options after my father's death. Ethan studied her face, as though weighing how much to say. There's always options. Most people choose the easy ones. You chose a harder path. Charlotte looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. No one in Clearwater knew the full truth of her circumstances, the crushing weight of her father's debts, the whispers that had followed her through Boston's polite society, the doors that had closed one by one. I did what was necessary, she said finally, as we all do. Maybe. Ethan rose, offering a hand to help her up. But necessary doesn't always mean right. Takes courage to do both. The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the boarding house, the early November twilight settling around them, Charlotte found herself reluctant for the afternoon to end. Thank you for the lesson, she said as he helped her dismount. I'm actually beginning to enjoy Writing. Ethan's hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. You're a natural once you got past the fear. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them before he stepped back, his expression closing like a door. Best get inside, weather's turning. Indeed, the temperature had dropped noticeably, and clouds were gathering on the western horizon. Will you be at the Thanksgiving celebration at the Harrisons? Charlotte asked, reluctant to say goodbye. Not planning on it. Have to check the northern herd. He gathered Daisy's reins. Probably snow before then. Disappointment settled in Charlotte's chest. I see. Well, perhaps the Sunday after? Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. Winter's coming. Won't be good riding weather for some time. He touched his hat brim. Good evening, Miss Bennet. The formality stung after weeks of using first names. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, matching his tone. She watched him ride away, confusion and hurt mingling as she tried to understand the sudden distance he had reinstated between them. The threatened snow arrived that night, blanketing Clearwater in 6 inches of white powder that transformed the dusty frontier town into something almost magical. Charlotte's students arrived at school the next morning pink-cheeked and boisterous. Many on sleds improvised from barrel staves. Their excitement was infectious, and Charlotte found herself setting aside the planned arithmetic lesson in favor of a poetry reading about winter landscapes, followed by an impromptu writing exercise, where each child described the snow in their own words. Miss Bennet, does it snow like this in Boston? 10-year-old Billy Wilson asked as they worked. Very much so, Charlotte replied, thinking of the neat streets lined with snow, gas lamps glowing through swirling flakes. Though the buildings are taller and closer together, so the drifts form differently. Do you miss it? Emma's quiet question caught Charlotte off guard. She considered her answer carefully, aware of the children's curious faces. I miss certain aspects of Boston, the libraries, the museums, the concerts. But Wyoming has its own beauty. She smiled at their solemn nods. And certainly the most attentive students I've ever taught. This brought giggles and renewed application to their writing. But Charlotte's thoughts remained troubled. Did she miss Boston? The city itself, yes, its cultural riches, its refined pleasures, the comfort of the familiar. But the life she had led there seemed increasingly distant, like a story read in childhood and half forgotten. Her melancholy persisted through the following days, not helped by the continued absence of Ethan from town. Sarah Harrison visiting the school with supplies for the upcoming Thanksgiving celebration noticed Charlotte's distraction. You seem troubled, my dear, she said as they sorted decorations the children had made. Is everything all right? Charlotte managed a smile. Just adjusting to the winter weather. We had a mild autumn in Boston last year. Sarah's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooled. I noticed you and Ethan Blackwood seemed to be forming a friendship. Those Sunday rides didn't go unnoticed. Heat rose to Charlotte's cheeks. Mr. Blackwood was kind enough to teach me about horses, nothing more. Of course. Sarah arranged paper turkeys along the windowsill. Though I should mention that Ethan isn't actually checking the northern herd. James gave him the week off to repair his cabin before the heavy snows come. Charlotte absorbed this information with a sharp pang. So he had lied to avoid seeing her at the Thanksgiving gathering. I see. Well, cabin repairs are certainly important before winter. Indeed. Sarah paused, then added gently, Ethan has his reasons for keeping to himself, Charlotte. Try not to judge him too harshly. I'm not judging at all, Charlotte protested. Mr. Blackwood's activities are none of my concern. Sarah's smile was sympathetic. If you say so, my dear. Now about this Thanksgiving recitation. Do you think the older children could manage some of Lincoln's proclamation? Or is that too ambitious? The conversation turned to safer topics, but Charlotte found her thoughts repeatedly returning to Ethan's cabin in the foothills north of the Harrison Ranch. What reasons could possibly justify his sudden withdrawal after weeks of growing companionship? And why did it matter so much to her? The answer to the latter question was becoming uncomfortably clear, though Charlotte tried to deny it. Somehow, against all reason, she had developed feelings for the taciturn cowboy, feelings that went beyond admiration for his skill with horses or appreciation for his understated intelligence. There was something about his quiet strength, his unpretentious wisdom, that had slipped past her carefully constructed defenses. Thanksgiving arrived with another light snowfall that made the journey to the Harrison Ranch challenging, but not impossible. Charlotte rode with the Wilsons in their covered wagon, listening to Thomas and Margaret's cheerful conversation, while her own thoughts remained distracted. The celebration would bring together most of Clearwater's residents and the surrounding ranchers, everyone except Ethan Blackwood apparently. The Harrison home buzzed with activity, tables set up in the main room and even extended into the kitchen to accommodate all the guests. Charlotte threw herself into helping with last-minute preparations, grateful for the distraction of practical tasks. Emma followed her like a shadow, chattering about school and horses and 100 other topics that required only minimal responses. "Mr. Blackwood is teaching me to ride Tempest's colt," the girl announced as they arranged pies on the sideboard. "He says I have a good seat, whatever that means." Charlotte's hands stilled momentarily. "Does he visit often?" "Almost every day. Papa says Mr. Blackwood treats our horses better than most folks treat their children." Emma lowered her voice. Conspiratorially, "I think he's lonely in that cabin all by himself, but he never says so." Before Charlotte could respond, Sarah called Emma to help with the children's seating arrangements, leaving Charlotte to ponder this new information. If Ethan visited the ranch daily, his absence from their riding lessons was even more deliberate than she had realized. The meal itself was a testament to frontier abundance: roast turkey and venison, potatoes, squash, cornbread, and pies of every description. Charlotte found herself seated between Howard Wilson, the lawyer from Denver, who had apparently extended his visit indefinitely, and Dr. Matthews, Clearwater's elderly physician. Howard monopolized the conversation with stories of his legal triumphs, while the doctor dozed intermittently between courses. "Miss Bennett," Howard said as dessert was served, "I've been meaning to ask if you might accompany me to the Christmas social next month. A lady of your refinement deserves proper escorting." Charlotte managed a polite smile. "That's very kind, Mr. Wilson, but I've already promised to help organize the children's performances that evening. Surely you can spare a dance or two." He persisted. "I've been told I'm quite accomplished in the waltz." She was saved from responding by a commotion at the front door. James Harrison rose from his seat at the head of the table, frowning. Who could that be in this weather? The door opened to reveal a snow-covered figure, a young man Charlotte didn't recognize, his face pale with cold and exertion. "Mr. Harrison, sir," he gasped. "There's been an accident. Mr. Blackwood's cabin. The roof collapsed under the snow. He's trapped inside." The room erupted in concerned exclamations. James immediately began organizing a rescue party, calling for ropes, shovels, and medical supplies. Dr. Matthews, suddenly alert, began gathering items from his bag. "How bad is it?" James demanded of the messenger. "Don't rightly know, sir. I was riding past and heard the crash. Tried to help, but the beams are too heavy for one man to lift. Mr. Blackwood was conscious when I left, but his legs pinned bad." Charlotte found herself on her feet without conscious decision. "I'm coming too," she announced, already reaching for her coat. Sarah caught her arm. "Charlotte, it's dangerous. The men will handle it." "I have basic medical training," Charlotte replied, surprised by her own calm determination. "My father insisted I learn in case of emergencies. I can help until Dr. Matthews arrives." James assessed her briefly, then nodded. "We'll take the strongest horses. The doctor can follow in the wagon with more supplies." "Within minutes, Charlotte." found herself mounted on one of the Harrison's sturdy quarter horses, riding through swirling snow alongside James and 3 ranch hands. The young messenger led the way, the horses struggling through drifts that sometimes reached their chests. Charlotte had never been so grateful for Ethan's riding lessons. Without them, she would have been worse than useless in this rescue effort. Ethan's cabin appeared suddenly through the snow, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a hillside for protection from the winds. One section of the roof had indeed collapsed inward, snow and timber creating a chaotic pile where the bedroom should have been. "Ethan," James called as they dismounted. "Can you hear me?" A weak response came from within the debris. Charlotte's heart contracted at the pain evident in that familiar voice. The men moved with practiced efficiency, assessing the damage and beginning to clear snow from the collapsed section. Charlotte followed James through the intact portion of the cabin, shocked by its stark simplicity. A single room served as kitchen and living space, with a small stove, a rough-hewn table, and a single chair. The only personal touches were a shelf of well-worn books and a cavalry saber mounted above the stone fireplace. The collapsed section had been separated by a partial wall, now splintered and hanging at a precarious angle. Through the gap, Charlotte could see Ethan pinned beneath a massive roof beam, his face ashen with pain and cold. Snow continued to filter through the opening above him, dusting his dark hair with white. "James," he acknowledged through gritted teeth, "told Nick not to bring half the territory." "Be thankful he did," James replied gruffly, already examining the fallen beam. "This is going to take all of us." Charlotte pushed past him, kneeling beside Ethan despite the danger of shifting debris. "Where are you hurt?" she asked her teacher's voice emerging, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. Ethan's eyes widened at the sight of her. "Charlotte, what the hell are you doing here?" "Apparently saving you from your own stubbornness," she replied, already checking his pupils for signs of concussion. "Now answer my question. Where are you hurt?" A faint shadow of his almost smile appeared despite the pain. "Left leg, under. The beam, think it's broken. Maybe some ribs too." He coughed, and Charlotte noted with alarm the fleck of blood at the corner of his mouth. "We need to get this beam off him immediately," she told James. "I suspect internal injuries." The next hour passed in a blur of coordinated effort. The men rigged a system of ropes and leverage points to lift the massive timber, while Charlotte kept watch over Ethan's condition, which seemed to worsen by the minute. His breathing grew increasingly labored, and the cold from the open roof threatened hypothermia on top of his injuries. When they finally lifted the beam enough to pull him free, Charlotte had to bite back a cry at the sight of his mangled leg. The bone had broken through the skin, and blood stained the floorboards beneath him. "We need to stabilize this before moving him," she instructed, tearing strips from her petticoat to create temporary bandages. "And he needs warmth immediately." They worked together to splint the leg, then carefully moved Ethan to the intact portion of the cabin. The stove had gone cold, and Charlotte set about rebuilding the fire while the men secured a tarp over the collapsed section to prevent further snow from entering. "The doctor's wagon won't make it through these drifts," James said grimly after, conferring with one of the hands. "Not until the snow lets up." Charlotte looked at Ethan, who had lapsed into semi-consciousness on his narrow cot. "Then we'll have to do what we can here. I need hot water, clean cloths, and any spirits you can find." James raised an eyebrow at her authoritative tone but nodded. "Nick, ride back and get Sarah. Tell her to bring the medical supplies and anything else Charlotte might need. The rest of us will work on clearing enough of a path for the doctor's wagon." Left alone with Ethan, Charlotte allowed herself a moment of fear before squaring her shoulders and focusing on the tasks at hand. The fire first, then water heating for sterilization, then a proper examination of his injuries. The broken leg was the most visible problem, but his labored breathing and the blood when he coughed concerned her more. "Ethan," she called, gently, patting his cheek. "You need to stay awake. Talk to me." His eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain but still that startling blue. "Bossy schoolteacher," he murmured. "Should be at the dinner. And miss all this excitement?" "Not a chance." She managed a smile as she carefully cut away his blood-soaked pant leg. "Tell me about this cabin. Did you build it yourself?" He nodded weakly. "First winter here. Needed. My own place." "It suits you," she said, working to clean the wound. "Simple, practical, though the structural integrity clearly needs work." A faint chuckle that turned into a grimace of pain. "Never expected snow so early." "Hush now," Charlotte soothed, alarmed by the effort speaking cost him. "Save your strength. The doctor will be here soon." But as the hours passed and Ethan's condition deteriorated, Charlotte feared the doctor might arrive too late. She had done everything her limited medical knowledge allowed, cleaned and set the broken leg as best she could, bound his ribs, kept him warm, and trickled water between his cracked lips. Still, his breathing grew more labored, and periods of consciousness briefer. Sarah arrived with supplies and expertise gained from years of frontier living. Together, they worked to stabilize Ethan, Sarah's calm competence complementing Charlotte's desperate determination. "You care for him," Sarah observed as they prepared a poultice for Ethan's chest. Charlotte didn't bother denying it. "Yes, he cares for you too, you know. That's why he's been avoiding you." Charlotte's hands stilled. "That makes no sense." Sarah's smile was sad. "It does if you understand Ethan. He believes he has nothing to offer a woman like you, educated, refined, used to better things than a broken-down cowboy's cabin." "That's ridiculous," Charlotte protested. "I never—" "Of course you didn't," Sarah interrupted gently. "But Ethan judges himself more harshly than anyone else could. He sees only what he lacks, not what he offers." Before Charlotte could respond, Ethan began coughing violently, bringing up alarming amounts of blood. The women worked frantically to ease his breathing, propping him up and applying the poultice to his chest. "He needs the doctor," Charlotte said, not bothering to hide her fear. "This is beyond what we can treat." As if summoned by her words, the door burst open to admit Dr. Matthews, snow-covered but mercifully present. He took in the scene with a professional eye and immediately set to work, his earlier doziness replaced by sharp focus. "Punctured lung from the broken ribs," he diagnosed after examination. "And the leg's bad, might lose it if infection sets in. We need to get him to town where I can treat him properly." "He'll never survive the journey in this condition," Charlotte argued. "The cold alone could kill him," the doctor sighed. "You may be right, but he needs surgery I can't perform here." He hesitated, then added, "If he survives the night, we'll reassess. That's the best I can offer." Charlotte felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. The thought of Ethan dying here, in this sparse cabin that reflected his solitary existence, was unbearable. After the doctor had done what he could and departed with Sarah to prepare for a possible transfer the next day, Charlotte sat beside Ethan's cot, holding his fever-hot hand and fighting back tears. "Don't you dare give up," she whispered fiercely. "You're too stubborn to let a roof beam defeat you, Ethan Blackwood." Through the long night, Charlotte maintained her vigil. She bathed Ethan's forehead with cool cloths, administered the laudanum the doctor had left, and spoke continuously. Reading from the books on his shelf, telling stories of her Boston life, even singing softly the lullabies her mother had once sung to her. Anything to create a tether that might hold him to this world. Dawn broke clear and cold, sunlight streaming through the makeshift repairs to the roof. Charlotte, exhausted beyond measure, had dozed off with her head resting on the edge of the cot, one hand still clasping Ethan's. She woke to the sensation of fingers weakly squeezing hers. "You're still here," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible but his eyes clearer than they had been all night. Charlotte straightened, hope surging through her fatigue. Of course I am. Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything foolish like dying. The ghost of his smile appeared. Wouldn't dare. You'd follow me to the hereafter, just to scold me. Tears of relief threatened, but Charlotte blinked them back. Your fever's broken, she noted, touching his forehead. How's the pain? Bearable. His gaze held hers. Why are you here, Charlotte? Why not let the others handle it? She considered deflecting the question, but found she lacked the energy for pretense. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you alone. Because you matter to me. Because, she stopped, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing. Ethan's expression softened into something she had never seen before, a vulnerability that transformed his features. I've been a fool, he said quietly, pushing you away. Thinking it was for your own good. A complete fool, Charlotte agreed, managing a watery smile. And we'll discuss it at length once you're properly recovered. But for now, you need to rest and prepare for the journey to town. The doctor thinks you can be moved today if we're careful. He caught her hand as she rose. Charlotte, thank you for finding me worth saving. She leaned down impulsively and pressed her lips to his forehead. Always, she whispered. Now rest. I'll be right here. The journey to town later that day was slow and agonizing. Dr. Matthews had constructed a travois that could be pulled behind a steady horse, padded with blankets to cushion Ethan from the worst of the bumps. Even so, each jolt brought fresh beads of sweat to his forehead, though he never cried out. Charlotte rode beside him, constantly checking his condition and offering water during brief stops. By the time they reached Clearwater, word of the accident had spread, and a crowd had gathered outside the doctor's office. Emma pushed through to Charlotte's side, her young face pinched with worry. Is Mr. Blackwood going to die? She asked with a child's directness. No, Charlotte replied firmly, helping the men lift the travois. He's far too stubborn for that. The next days were a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. Dr. Matthews performed surgery to repair Ethan's lung and set his leg properly, then installed him in a back room of his house for recovery. Charlotte divided her time between school duties and Ethan's bedside, refusing to acknowledge the raised eyebrows and whispered comments her dedication provoked. A week after the accident, she arrived at the doctor's house to find Ethan sitting up, some color returned to his face and a book open on his lap, one of hers that she had brought to read to him. You look better, she observed, setting down the basket of food Sarah had sent. Almost human again. Feel it too, he replied. Doc says the lung's healing clean. Leg will take longer. Charlotte busied herself arranging the food on a small table, suddenly shy now that crisis no longer provided purpose to their interactions. The children made you cards. Emma insisted on delivering hers personally, but I told her she needs to wait until you're stronger. Ethan watched her movements with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You saved my life, he said abruptly. Doc says I'd have been dead by morning if you hadn't come. Charlotte shrugged, uncomfortable with his gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, he countered firmly. Not anyone, not like you did. He hesitated, then added quietly, Sarah told me you stayed all night. Talked to me when I was out of my head with fever. Heat rose to Charlotte's cheeks. I don't recall exactly what I said. The circumstances were rather extreme. A faint smile touched his lips. I remember some of it. Something about being too stubborn to die. And, he paused, the smile deepening. Something about my eyes reminding you of the Wyoming sky. You were delirious, Charlotte replied primly, mortified that he had heard her unguarded musings. I said whatever seemed likely to keep you fighting. Ethan's expression sobered. I've been fighting all my life, Charlotte. War, wilderness, my own demons. Never had much to fight for except survival. His gaze held hers. Until now. The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Charlotte hardly dared interpret. Before she could respond, Dr. Matthews entered with fresh bandages, effectively ending their private conversation. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte established a routine of visiting Ethan each afternoon after school, bringing books, news of the town, and sometimes Emma or other students who had grown attached to the taciturn cowboy during his convalescence. To her surprise, Ethan showed remarkable patience with the children, answering their endless questions about horses, the war, and his recovery with a gentleness she had glimpsed only occasionally before. "You're good with them," she observed. One afternoon after Emma had departed, leaving behind a somewhat lopsided drawing of Tempest. "Have you considered teaching?" Ethan laughed, a sound that still startled her with its rarity. "Can't exactly see myself standing at a blackboard, Miss Bennett." "No, not academic subjects," Charlotte clarified. "But horsemanship? These children will grow up working with horses. Who better to teach them proper techniques?" He considered this, absently rubbing his injured leg, which now bore a proper cast. "Never thought of passing on what I know. Always figured folks either had the knack or didn't." "All skills can be taught with the right approach," Charlotte insisted. "You certainly taught me, and I was the most hopeless case imaginable." Ethan's expression softened. "You weren't hopeless. Just afraid. Big difference." He studied her face. "We all have fears, Charlotte. It's what we do with them that matters." The conversation stayed with Charlotte long after she'd left, making her wonder about the fears Ethan himself harbored. Sarah had hinted at his belief that he had nothing to offer a woman like her. Was that why he had pulled away, just as they were growing closer? The thought both frustrated and touched her, that this strong, capable man could doubt his own worth so profoundly. December brought the first serious blizzard of the season, trapping most of Clearwater's residents in their homes for 3 days. When the winds finally calmed and paths were cleared, Charlotte made her way to the doctor's house, concerned about how Ethan had weathered the storm. She found him standing at the window, leaning heavily on a crutch, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered street outside. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded gently, setting down her basket of supplies. The doctor said at least another week of bed rest. "Been in that bed for nearly a month," Ethan replied without turning. "A man needs to remember he can stand." Charlotte moved to his side, noting with concern the lines of pain around his mouth, despite his stoic expression. "At least sit down while I make tea. I've brought some of Margaret's scones." To her surprise, he complied without argument, lowering himself carefully into the room's single chair. "Town looks different under all that snow," he observed. "Almost pretty." "It's beautiful," Charlotte agreed, busying herself with the small stove in the corner. The children were ecstatic. "We abandoned regular lessons yesterday in favor of snow sculptures." Ethan watched her movements with that same intensity she had noticed during her first visit. "You've changed," he said abruptly. "Since you first came to Wyoming." Charlotte paused in her preparations. "Have I?" "You don't hold yourself so rigid anymore. You laugh easier. Move like you belong here." She considered this assessment. "I suppose I have adapted better than I expected. Though I still miss certain aspects of Boston. What do you miss most?" His question seemed genuinely curious rather than challenging. Charlotte thought for a moment. The libraries, the concert halls, walking through the public garden in spring when the magnolias bloom. She smiled slightly. "Hot water that doesn't require hauling buckets from the pump." Evin nodded, understanding in his eyes. Civilization has its advantages. "But so does Wyoming," she added, surprising herself with her sincerity. "The openness, the honesty of the people. The way the land makes no pretenses. It simply is what it is, beautiful and harsh all at once." "Like the horses," Ethan said softly. "Yes." Their eyes met in perfect understanding. "Like the horses." A comfortable silence settled between them as Charlotte finished preparing the tea and arranged the scones on a plate. When she handed Ethan his cup, their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected warmth through her. Doc says I can move back to the ranch next week, Ethan said after a moment. James offered me a room in the main house until spring, when I can rebuild the cabin. Charlotte felt a complex mixture of emotions at this news. Relief that he would have proper care, disappointment that their daily visits would end, and an unexpected jealousy that Emma would see him more than she would. "That's wonderful," she managed. "The Harrisons will take excellent care of you." Ethan studied her face, seeming to read the emotions she was trying to conceal. I told him no. "What? Why would you refuse? You can't possibly manage alone yet." He set down his cup deliberately. "Because I've made other arrangements. Thomas Wilson has a small apartment above the store that he uses for storage. He's offered to clear it out and rent it to me until spring." Charlotte absorbed this information, confused by his decision. "But why would you choose to stay in town rather than with friends who could help you?" Ethan's gaze was steady. "Because there's a schoolteacher in town I'm not finished getting to know." The directness of his statement left no room for misinterpretation. "Unless she objects." Heart hammering, Charlotte found herself momentarily speechless. "I would not object," she finally managed. "In fact, I would consider it quite convenient for continuing your recovery." The smile that transformed. His face was like sunrise breaking over the Wyoming plains, sudden, brilliant, and completely captivating. "Good," he said simply. "That's settled then." Christmas preparations consumed the town in the following days. Charlotte's students rehearsed tirelessly for their holiday performance. The mercantile displayed newly arrived toys and candies from the East, and every home and business sported evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The festive atmosphere was infectious, and Charlotte found herself embracing the frontier Christmas with unexpected enthusiasm. Ethan moved into the apartment above the mercantile 3 days before Christmas, with Charlotte and several townsmen, helping transport his meager possessions salvaged from the collapsed cabin. The space was small but clean, with a wood stove for heat, a comfortable bed, and windows overlooking Clearwater's main street. Charlotte had spent the previous evening arranging fresh linens and curtains, and placing a small evergreen branch in a jar as a makeshift Christmas tree. "Not much compared to your Boston Christmases," Ethan commented as he surveyed the simple decorations. Charlotte smiled, remembering the elaborate trees and expensive gifts of her childhood. "It's perfect," she said honestly. "Christmas isn't about the trappings." The school's Christmas pageant on Christmas Eve brought the entire community together in the small church. Charlotte's students performed admirably, reciting poems, singing carols, and enacting a somewhat chaotic nativity scene that nevertheless charmed the audience of proud parents and neighbors. From her position at the side of the makeshift stage, Charlotte spotted Ethan seated near the back, his injured leg propped on a cushioned stool. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and his smile of approval warmed her more than any formal accolade could have. After the performance, as families gathered for refreshments in the church hall, Charlotte made her way to his side. "You shouldn't have come out in this cold," she chided gently. "Your recovery was worth risking to see you in your element," he finished. "Those children adore you, Charlotte. You've given them more than just book learning." Her cheeks warmed at the compliment. "They're remarkable children. I've learned as much from them as they have from me. That's what makes you a true teacher." He glanced around at the festive gathering, then lowered his voice. "Would you consider visiting tomorrow for Christmas? Nothing formal, just, I'd like to see you." "I'd be delighted," Charlotte replied, her heart lightening at the prospect. "I've already promised to join the Wilsons for dinner, but I could come earlier." The smile that lit his eyes was all the Christmas gift she needed. The following morning dawned clear and bitterly cold, the temperature well below zero, as Charlotte made her way through Clearwater's deserted streets toward the mercantile. She had spent half the night wrapping her gift for Ethan, a fine leather-bound journal she had ordered from Denver weeks ago, hoping it would arrive in time. She found him waiting for her, the apartment warmer than she expected thanks to a well-stoked fire. To her surprise, the small table had been set with what appeared to be real china, and the scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the space. "Merry Christmas," Ethan greeted her, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He had shaved and combed his hair neatly and wore a clean shirt she hadn't seen before. "Merry Christmas," she returned, unwinding her scarf. "What's all this?" "Breakfast," he said simply. "Sarah sent the cinnamon rolls. Thomas loaned the dishes. Coffee's my contribution. Made it strong, the way you like it." Charlotte was touched by the effort he had clearly made. "It's lovely, Ethan. Thank you." They sat together, enjoying the simple meal and the quiet comfort of each other's company. Afterward, Charlotte presented her gift, watching nervously as Ethan unwrapped it with careful hands. "This is too fine for the likes of me," he said, running his fingers over the embossed leather cover. "Nonsense," Charlotte replied firmly. "Every great horse breeder needs to record his bloodlines properly, and I thought—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "You might want to write down some of your knowledge for teaching purposes." Ethan's gaze lifted to hers, surprisingly vulnerable. "You still think I could teach?" "I know you could," she said with conviction. "You have gifts that shouldn't be lost, Ethan. Experience and understanding that these children, this community, needs." He nodded slowly, accepting both the gift and the faith behind it. "I have something for you too," he said, reaching for a small package on the windowsill. "It's not much." Charlotte unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of wild roses. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the delicate design with her fingertip. "Open it," Ethan prompted, an unusual nervousness in his tone. Inside, nestled on a scrap of blue velvet, lay a silver brooch in the shape of a horse, small but perfectly formed, its mane and tail flowing as if in motion. "Ethan," she whispered, lifting it carefully. "Did you make this?" He nodded, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. "Worked on it during those long days in bed. Dr. Matthews brought me the silver, an old coin he had. Saw I needed something to keep my hands busy." Charlotte was speechless, overwhelmed by the skill and sentiment represented in the tiny sculpture. "I've never received anything so beautiful," she said finally, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Charlotte," he began, his voice rougher than usual, "I'm not a man of many words. Never have been. But I need to say some things that have been on my mind." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "I'm listening. When I first saw you at the Harrisons' gathering, looking terrified of Tempest but too proud to show it, I thought you were just another city woman who'd leave at the first hard winter." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "But you stayed. Faced your fears. Built something here." Charlotte waited, sensing he needed to express things in his own way, at his own pace. "I pushed you away because I believed you deserved better than a broken-down ex-cavalryman with nothing to his name but horse sense and a collapsing cabin." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I was wrong to make that decision for you, to not give you the choice." "Yes, you were," Charlotte agreed softly. "Very wrong." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So I'm giving you the choice now. I can't offer fancy things or city comforts. Can't promise I'll ever be completely at ease in society. But I can promise to be honest with you always, to respect your mind and your independence, to build something lasting if you're willing." Charlotte's throat tightened with emotion. "Are you proposing, Ethan Blackwood?" "Not yet," he replied with unexpected gentleness. "I'm asking for time. Time to court you properly, to make sure you know exactly what you'd be choosing. Time to rebuild more than just my cabin." The honesty of his approach moved her deeply. Where other men might have rushed to secure her commitment, Ethan offered respect for her decision-making process, acknowledging both his feelings and her right to certainty about her own. "I would like that very much," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, the time I mean, to build something together. Relief and joy mingled in his expression. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he leaned across the table and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss as gentle as his touch with the horses, but containing promises that sent warmth spreading through her entire being. When they parted, Charlotte found herself smiling with an openness that would have been unthinkable months ago. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ethan replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners, "we write our own story. One day at a time." The winter months that followed were the happiest of Charlotte's life. As Ethan's leg healed, they established new routines that wove their lives together with increasing intimacy. Sunday rides resumed once the worst of winter passed, though now they were accompanied by picnic lunches and conversations that ranged from literature to horsemanship to their hopes for the future. Ethan became a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, initially coming to repair a leaking roof and staying to share his knowledge of local wildlife and geography with the fascinated students. His natural ability to connect with the children confirmed Charlotte's belief in his teaching potential, and she began formulating plans for summer writing lessons that would combine practical skills with educational content. By early spring, the entire town had accepted them as a couple, their courtship conducted with a propriety that satisfied even the most conservative residents. Howard Wilson had long since transferred his attentions elsewhere, and Margaret delighted in planning for a June wedding, though Charlotte and Ethan had made no formal announcement. On the first truly warm day in April, Ethan suggested a ride to a special place he wanted to show her. They set out early, Charlotte now comfortable enough on horseback to appreciate the journey through greening meadows where wildflowers had begun to carpet the earth in splashes of color. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked as they followed. "A stream into the foothills north of town. You'll see," Ethan replied with the mysterious half-smile that still made her heart skip. "Not much further." They rounded a bend in the stream, and Charlotte gasped at the view that suddenly opened. Before them, a small valley lay nestled between protective ridges, sheltered from the worst of Wyoming's winds yet open to the southern sun. A natural meadow filled its center, while stands of pine and aspen provided windbreaks at strategic points. The stream widened into a small pond before continuing its journey downhill. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed, taking in the perfect balance of openness and shelter, sun and shade. "Harrison land," Ethan explained, watching her reaction carefully. "But James is willing to sell this parcel. Says it's too far from the main ranch to be useful to him." Charlotte turned to him, suddenly understanding. "Are you thinking of building here?" Ethan nodded, something vulnerable in his expression. "Not just rebuilding my cabin. Building something new. Something meant for more than one person." He dismounted, then helped her down from her horse with hands that lingered at her waist. "Come see." He led her to a flat area near the pond, where the morning sun warmed the earth. House would face south, catching light all day. Kitchen windows would look toward the pond. Big porch for summer evenings. His voice grew more confident as he outlined his vision. Barn over there, protected by those pines. Good pasture for horses. Maybe a few cattle. Garden along the southern slope. Charlotte listened, enchanted by the picture he painted, not just of buildings and livestock, but of a life, a shared life. "What do you think?" he asked finally, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I think it's perfect," she said honestly. "A beautiful dream. Not just a dream." Ethan took her hands in his. "I've saved most of my wages these 5 years. Have enough to buy the land, build a proper house. Not fancy, but solid. Room to grow." The implication was clear, and Charlotte felt tears pricking behind her eyes. "Ethan Blackwood, are you finally proposing to me?" He smiled fully then, the last of his guards falling away. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I am." He dropped to one knee despite the lingering stiffness in his injured leg. "Charlotte Bennett, I love you. Your courage, your determination, your heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building this dream with me?" Joy bubbled up within her, effervescent and pure. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." He rose and gathered her into his arms, his kiss containing all the passion and tenderness she had glimpsed beneath his quiet exterior. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Charlotte felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect pearl. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they headed west from Virginia, before the war. Said the pearl represented the rare and precious life they would build together." As he slipped it onto her finger, Charlotte thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from Boston society to a Wyoming schoolhouse, from fear to courage, from loneliness to belonging. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and so is the sentiment." They spent the remainder of the day exploring what would become their homestead, planning where each element would be placed, sharing visions of the life they would create together. As the sun began its westward descent, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the return journey. "What about the school?" Ethan asked as they rode side by side through the greening landscape. "Will you miss teaching?" Charlotte smiled, having already considered this question. "I won't be giving it up entirely. Emma will be ready for advanced studies soon, and there are other children in the outlying ranches who can't make the daily trip to town. I thought perhaps I might teach a few days a week at our home for those who want more education than the basics." Ethan nodded, approval in his eyes. "And the rest of the time?" "The rest of the time," Charlotte replied with newfound confidence, "I'll be helping to build the finest horse breeding operation in the territory. I've been studying bloodlines, you know. And I have excellent organizational skills." His laugh, once so rare, now came easily. "That you do, Miss Bennett. That you do." As they crested the final hill overlooking Clearwater, Charlotte reined in her horse to admire the view. The small frontier town that had once seemed so alien now represented familiar comfort. The schoolhouse where she had found purpose, the thingy mercantile where Ethan had recovered, the church where they would soon exchange vows. "Having second thoughts?" Ethan asked, misinterpreting her pause. Charlotte shook her head, reaching across to take his hand. "Not at all, just appreciating the journey." She met his gaze, finding in those blue eyes the same steadfast strength that had first drawn her to him. "When I came west, I thought I was leaving everything behind. I never imagined I was riding toward everything that would matter most." Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. "Funny how life works that way. Sometimes what scares us most turns out to be the thing that saves us." "Like a spirited stallion," Charlotte suggested with a smile. "Or a fierce Boston schoolteacher," he countered, returning her smile with one of his own. Together they guided their horses down the slope toward town, toward friends who would celebrate their news, toward the future they would build together, a future that would combine the best of both their worlds. Charlotte touched the silver horse brooch pinned to her riding jacket, remembering Ethan's words from their first meeting. "He's gentle like I planned to be." She hadn't understood then what he was really offering, not just gentleness, but patience, respect, and the space to discover her own strength. In return, she had given him connection, purpose beyond survival, and the courage to reach for happiness despite his fears. As the Wyoming sun warmed their backs and the breeze carried the scent of spring growth, Charlotte knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not in a place, but with a person who saw her completely and loved her exactly as she was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you Don't miss any upload from us.